Welcome to the Lost Ones Masonic Podcast. I am your host, Brother Joshua Feliciano, and I hail from St. James Lodge, number 114, based out of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of New York. I am here with my co-host, Brandon Williams. He hails from George Washington Carver Lodge, number 95, based out of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of New York. Quick disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect any views and opinions of any Masonic body in which myself or Brandon Williams is a member of. Welcome to episode number 4, The Truth. So we have some stuff to talk about. Recently, a bogus Mason is always making these crazy, unlogical statements and never really clarifies them. And he has a following, and they believe whatever they say. And I'm a big person that if you're going to speak on the truth. I'm not mentioning his name on here because I'm not giving him the publicity. I don't think he's even worth that. We're going to speak the truth. We're going to sit here and narrow down every little aspect. We're going to talk about regularity. More importantly, the lineage aspect of it. We're going to talk about recognition and how that works. And we're going to talk about sovereignty and how that works. Because this is a big thing within the bogus world of Masonry that they have no idea on how any of this works. And the reason being is because what they're taught from beginning of their organization to where it started to where it is now, it's passed down information. Only a very few sit there and actually go in depth with research. And even then, some don't even leave because they're too comfortable in where they're at. So we're gonna go down these little things. Brandon, are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So let's talk about regularity. Brandon, what is regularity?
So regularity is, in a nutshell, is any organization, Masonically speaking, that can trace its lineage to the Grand Lodge of England.
So when we talk about England, do they know why it's England?
Well, I mean, we know, but probably not.
Here's the thing. They seem to think that, we're just trying to kiss the white man's ass.
No, it's and I'll expound on that. The Grand Lodge of England, or at least now as it's styled, the United Grand Lodge of England, is the mother lodge of the world. It's the mother Grand Lodge of the world. Masonry, as far as we know, started in England. So everything, at least as far as ancient craft is concerned, and Royal Arts, but I won't dab into it, stems from the United Grand Lodge of England.
So a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with somebody, right, online, someone who happened to be a clandestine Mason. And they happened to sit there and say, well, because I expressed why it was, because I'm going to get to that in a second, why was it was England, Scotland, and Ireland, right? I'm going to get to that. But they brought up Kemet, right? And they said, well, Kemet came before the Grand Lodge of England. When it comes to Kemet, I do not sit here and go on the back and forth when it comes to Kemet. I do that enough for one of my lodge brothers. And mind you, it's all love at the end of the day between me and him. Like when I see him, it's nothing but hugs. But we sit here for hours debating that this is what we do. We sit here. He believes it's true, and it's okay. It's okay. And I sit here and I say, well, we don't have anything concrete to prove that that's a fact, which we don't. We have nothing concrete, right? So my response to this person was, does your organization have lineage to Kemet? What do you think he said?
Of course he said no.
He was honest. He sat there and said, no, we don't have lineage to Kemet. I'm like, so I'm sitting here, so then why are you bringing that up in this conversation? If your organization, if you're going to throw the Kemet thing out, that it was first, and your organization doesn't have lineage to it, why are you bringing it up? It doesn't make any sense because you yourself can't trace your lineage to the Kemet. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, I'm with you.
If that was true that you did, then that would mean you'd be tied to operative masonry somehow, right?
Correct.
See, but what they don't realize is that Prince Hall and the state Grand Lodges are tied to operative masonry.
That's right.
Because what they don't know is that England, the Grand Lodge of England, was formed by 3 operative lodges and a speculative lodge. They don't know that 33 lodges formed the Grand Lodge of Scotland. And mind you, they also don't know that 6 operative lodges formed the Grand Lodge of Ireland. So when we talk about the 33 lodges that formed this Grand Lodge of Scotland, we know Lodge of Edinburgh, number 1, was once an operative lodge, and they were part of that formation. So when we talk about being tied to operative masonry, understand these lodges were never a part of a Grand Lodge system.
Correct. It didn't exist yet. Right.
These are the first Grand Lodges in the world. And mind you, somebody's going to sit there and try to comment and be like, what about France? What about France? Yes, I understand France has a very big thing when it comes to the spread of Freemasonry. I will not take that away from them. But you need to understand France was formed by lodges that were created by the Grand Lodge of England.
Correct.
So their lineage is tied to the Grand Lodge of England.
Tied to the Grand Lodge of England.
So now when we sit here and we're talking about operative Freemasonry, they can't sit there and say, well, this isn't important because you learn in the first degree why operative Freemasonry is important. So this is what separates us from them. This is what they need to understand is why they're not legitimate. This is why they need to understand that they will never be recognized because they do not have any ties to operative Freemasonry. I'm going to break it down even further. They think that some of them think that they're legitimate because of the fact that they have a charter or they have a business that was incorporated by the state.
Talk about it.
The state is not a Masonic body.
Correct. It's
so
not.
How can they tell you you're a Masonic body?
It has no jurisdiction to suggest so.
It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. So when we talk about having lineage to England, Scotland, and Ireland, it's because we have ties to operative Freemasonry. This is what makes us legitimate. You can sit here and say whatever you want to say. You can break down however you want to break it down. You can tell whatever lie and anything in between. The fact is, you do not have that same lineage. I don't care. Plain and simple. It means nothing else.
That's it.
So when we look at our lineage, right, we got the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New York. Yep. That was formed by Boyer, Rising Sun, and Celestial, right? Boyer was originally chartered
Massachusetts, if I remember correctly.
African Grand Lodge, right? They were chartered by African Grand Lodge. One of the lodges that formed African Grand Lodge was African 459.
459, yep.
And 459 was chartered by the Grand Lodge of England.
Grand Lodge of England.
And then the Grand Lodge of England was formed by the operative and speculative lodges, right?
Yep.
So I just went over lineage. That is how the concept of lineage works. Notice, I never once said anything about African Lodge number 1. Why is that? Why do you think I didn't even mention African Lodge number 1?
It's irrelevant.
Why is it irrelevant?
Well, if you want to go into it, I mean, for one, it's like, I mean, you, not to beat a dead horse, but literally.
Talk about it. Let's go.
I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but it's like you just said it, right? Like I can trace, and we kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago, right? Like my lodge number is 95, yours is 114, right? So somewhere in the first 94 preceding lodges, members said, "Hey, let's get together and start a 95th,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll put it here in Wine Dance to service that community."
Mm-hmm.
You can trace that back all the way to Boyer, who was chartered.
Which, by the way, let me also mention, Boyer is the longest existing lodge within Prince Hall. They were established in 1812. A lot of people don't know that. But go ahead.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the longest existing currently operating lodge.
Oh, got you. Longest tenured. Got you.
They still in operation.
Okay, got you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Boyer was chartered, or constituted, instituted, however you want to word it, style it, because there are subtle differences, by the African Grand Lodge. Mind you, so they were an offshoot, so to speak, from the Grand Lodge directly, not from another group of Masons, so to speak. Like the Grand Lodge said, "Hey, we're going to create another lodge," and obviously, like you said, that
they're going to use this book as a reason to sit there and say why clandestine Masonry, why Prince Hall is clandestine. For those that don't know, this is John Harris's Landmarks of a Father. Great book, amazing book. This is my guy. I'm telling you, talk to him once in a while, here and there. That man has taught me so much when it comes to Masonry and history. He's one of the ones that actually I talked to. And he clearly made it very clear. And he said, this in no way has nothing to do with making Prince Hall clandestine, because it was the 459 charter that made them regular.
Correct.
And I think that's what they don't understand. That's what they don't get. They sit there and they think, well, how can that be possible? Let's explain how that can be possible. Okay. When we talk about African Lodge number 1, they were illegally made Masons. According to this, because we know that we have 2 accounts, the Grand Lodges all except one or the other. Okay. And I can't get into any other why the Grand Lodge does that. That's beyond, that's above my pay rate. Not going there. Okay. Based on the evidence on here, right? Based on the evidence on here, when we look at what it says, they were illegally made Masons because it was done by John Batt. At some point, Prince Hall must have found out what was going on. And understand, during this time, you were talking about Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, the 13 colonies,
13 colonies, yeah.
It was a very small area, but everybody got around. So imagine how many Masons he got around. Because understand, he wasn't a slave. He was free to roam around. Right. He wasn't a server. He moved. We have records that he moved around. So I guarantee you he spoke to people. Somehow he found out what was going on. And William Moody got involved. William Moody spoke on behalf of Prince Hall and the 14 other brothers. And then the Grand Lodge of England issued a charter healing over. And this is where they're going to literally go like crazy. They're going to go crazy when I say this. Healed them over and made them regular, made them legitimate. Now they're going to sit there and say, how was that possible? You can't do that. That's not how Masonry works.
Well, that's how sovereignty works, buddy.
It's not even that. It's just, if you look at the whole structure, right? Back then, it was a completely different ball game than what it is now.
Oh, of course.
It's not the same. It really isn't.
200 plus years.
So they don't understand that Masonry has evolved. So here's the one thing about healing. Healing is dependent on the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction decides how they choose to heal a person.
Correct.
Okay. You have those that will sit you and re-obligate you. You have those that will sit there and have you do all 3 degrees all over again. And then, believe it or not, I don't even know how others may be able to do it, but it depends on the jurisdiction.
Those are the 2 most popular ways. Typically, right. They'll either do an occasion of a sort and just kind of run you through the ritual, or they'll, like you said, just re-obligate you.
Right.
Depending on how they feel about it.
Correct. So how is it that a charter can heal you? Let me explain. And this is gonna blow some people's minds away when they hear this, because I'm telling you right now, I'm making this as dummy proof as possible. Okay.
Well, there's always one. At least.
I'm telling you, I'm making this as dummy proof as possible for people to understand how. The Grand Lodge of England, no matter who you talk to, it doesn't matter who you talk to. They were anybody, whether you're a clandestine, bogus, or not, will admit that the Grand Lodge of England is a legitimate Masonic body. Flat.
There's no disputing that at all. Like
they created that 459 charter.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Prince Hall was a member of 459.
That's right.
Making him a legitimate Mason.
Talk about it. Talk about it.
Another step-by-step way to understand something. So when we talk about African Lodge number 1, this is why that is completely irrelevant, because it was the 459 charter that made them legitimate.
Correct.
So we need to stop sitting here and spreading false truths, false information. If you don't know, don't talk about it.
And on that note, Josh, not to cut you off, but all of these brothers that got together to form 459 were made they were made Masons in a preceding lodge prior to the charter being issued.
Right.
So it's a double whammy. They were regular Masons anyway.
Right. So even if we go with the first account, even with and that's the crazy thing. Even if we go with the first account, that it was Military Lodge 441, right?
Correct.
That lodge was under dispensation, under the Grand Lodge of England, supposedly, allegedly.
And the numbers line up. 441 precedes 459.
It's just but you got to understand that's Ireland. That's Ireland. That's a separate thing, right? They went to England to get their new charter.
The new charter. Yeah, but
so some people don't understand. And also, here's the biggest thing, and this is another thing. Back then, remember, Masonry was not what it is now.
Oh, heavens
Back then, lodges were formed first, then asked to be a part of a Grand Lodge for protection. When we look
it's not like now, the Grand Lodges aren't.
Right, they aren't created within the Grand Lodge. Back then, the lodges were formed first. This is why Boyer Lodge was created. When we look at Boyer Lodge was created in 1812, but they didn't get a charter to the 1820s from African Grand Lodge. So back then, it was a completely different ball game.
Their process was different.
Another lodge, they want to sit there and try to isolate Prince Hall. Check this out. Fredericksburg Lodge number 4. A lot of people don't know that lodge. But when I sit here and say George Washington's Lodge,
I'm about to say that's VA.
That's yeah.
That's VA.
George Washington's Lodge was formed first. Then they became a part of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They were doing it also.
That was the thing.
So this was an uncommon practice back then. And that's what people need to understand. So when they sit here and they say, we're using the ancient ways. Yeah, what is those ancient ways? Because understand that Masonry has evolved. The laws have evolved. Just like the way state laws evolve, guess what? Masonic law has evolved.
Correct. And I think that's the biggest difference, right? Like they say, oh, we're using the ancient way. And it's like, well, it wasn't a common practice because we all just say, hey, this is how we're going to do things. That's just what it was. Geographically speaking, England's, at that time, light years, a 4 or 5 week boat ride away. So
I'm going to tell you something.
Construct. Grand Lodges were just still being formed. They had most of them didn't have constitutions.
And you know what's crazy?
Landscapes to do all of it.
And you know what's crazy? Like paperwork back then was horrible.
Oh, shit.
Like the Grand Lodge of Ireland. The Grand Lodge of Ireland has no paperwork for anything before 1730 or something like that. Like the record keeping and it's just it wasn't thought of as an important thing at that time, I guess.
You imagine paying taxes back then?
It was like but
we didn't get your money. Going to jail.
it's a crazy notion, right? And one of the biggest things that happened in Masonry was in 1814 when they had the International Compact. The whole point of that was to get the United Grand Lodge of England in line with standards of Masonry. But what people don't understand, that could possibly be the first recognition treaty between Grand Lodges.
Yeah.
Because before that, the Grand Lodge of England, called the Ancient Grand Lodge of England, the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and the Grand Lodge of Ireland, clandestine. So that treaty, the International Compact of 1814, literally changed standards for Masonry forever. That treaty made it impossible for a lodge to chart another lodge. It put limits on the military lodges. Because back then, military lodges was also chartering other lodges.
Because of how often they moved around.
Mm-hmm. And this is how the spread of Masonry happened.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah, you would know. You get what I'm saying? So
yeah, like Alaska, the Principal Grand Lodge of Alaska was formed and organized rather by remnants of Oklahoma, Washington State, because of military members. So
there you go. There you go. And so when we talk about recognition, that's the next thing we're going to talk about in a few minutes. We need to understand that there is a set of rules that regular Masonry follows that bogus clandestine Masons don't follow.
Correct.
It's because of the fact that they just don't know. You know, when we look at these bogus Masonic organizations, and I'm gonna wrap up this whole lineage thing right now. When we look at that, how can you sit there and say your lineage goes to an expelled Mason? Or how can you sit there and say that your lineage goes down to a man who was never a Mason to begin with?
Talk about it. You know, and just to play devil's advocate, I will argue that some of them, they do know,
and don't care,
and they just don't care.
but then they and see, that's why I have this show, because of those people. You have those people that will sit there and lie to membership,
correct,
because they don't want to lose their spot,
their status quo that no one recognizes anyway. But that's a whole nother.
Well, unless they're recognized within themselves. And then we have those that sit there and look at you and say, well, you're not following your obligation.
Which one?
Those are the ones that don't know that. We have God knows how many obligations that are different. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's crazy. But when it comes to us, we are following obligation, because mind you, I was just at Dork Lodge last night.
Yeah, I saw that.
And they were being re-obligated. Everybody in the room got re-obligated. It was literally it was part of their thing. We all sat there and reset the entire re-obligation for the third degree. And when we look at it, there's a portion in that, and I can't get into details. I'm not going to.
Of course not.
There's a portion that talks about clandestine Masons.
We're on the same page.
I
know that part very well.
Right? There is a part that talks about clandestine Masons.
Yes,
so how are you going to tell me I'm not following my obligation, but yet I'm following my obligation?
You know, some people just like to hear themselves talk.
Right. They like to hear the sound of their own voice. You know what I'm saying?
That's it.
Like dude likes to sit here and butcher my last name.
They call that, you know, my one of my philosophy classes, they would call that concept of illegitimate fallacies appealing to authority. Well, it must be true because he said it.
Right? And that's what it comes down to. So let's further this conversation now to recognition.
Okay, let's do it. I like this part.
What is recognition?
Well, I think it's multifaceted for sure, but there's really two main components of recognition, right? And the first of which, and I'm gonna try to define it without touching sovereignty, because I know we're trying to save that for the last part. But in a nutshell, recognition is amongst Grand Lodges. It's how they govern themselves as far as who they want to fellowship with, who they want to conduct Masonic business with. And then that goes without saying that just because you're regular doesn't mean you're going to be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And just because, pretty much just because you're regular doesn't mean you're going to be recognized.
So let me ask you a
It's
question.
not definitive. Yeah.
Right. So let me pose a question. Is every recognition treaty the same?
Absolutely not.
Why?
Well, I don't want to touch the sovereignty part just yet, but
no, I get, but you can, but please, that is exactly why.
Well, yeah. So like part of the exercising of sovereign liberty or sovereignty rather is having the ability to say this is who I'm going to conduct business with or not, regardless of how anyone else feels about it or anyone else's relationship. Like for example, New Jersey, just for example, they neighbor us and they could say, hey, we're suspending all communication with the Prince of Grand Lodge in New York for whatever reason, for whatever period of time. They're well within their right to do that. Now, that doesn't change our relationship with, let's say, another neighboring state like Delaware or Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. But once again, that's just a perfect example of how you can be recognized by some and not by all.
So so what you're saying is that it basically falls down to the fact that
ultimately it's each Grand Lodge and their sovereignty, and they elect who they want to.
And this is the reason why it's called a treaty, right?
Correct.
Because both have to agree upon their sovereign terms.
Correct.
They both have to agree upon their sovereign terms. So
it has to be conducive for both parties.
Right. So within the history of Prince Hall, there's been a number of times where recognition has been established without visitation.
Yes.
And not only is that the case, but there's also been times when, okay, cool, we're not going to do the intervisitation for this 5 years. And then we'll come back to the table and renegotiate and see what's going on.
Correct.
Perfect example is Kentucky. I think at the beginning they didn't have intervisitation. And then later on they added intervisitation. Right? Our Grand Lodge, we got we did our treaty in 2001. We didn't start visiting until 2002.
2002, yeah.
And mind you, the first official, but check this, the first official meeting was between grandmasters.
Correct.
That was a big thing, right? So when they sit here and they say it's all or nothing, they don't understand, and this is what and this is why you're not legitimate, because you can't understand that there's history that they need to overcome. These states have had bad blood. And I'm talking about and we're not even talking about masonry. We're talking about history.
Yeah, like literally, like damn near, like
it is crazy because you have some of these brothers that can sit there and say, his grandfather killed my grandfather.
Yeah. Go back.
And there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. Guarantee you, these bogus lodges try to sit there. Remember, the majority of these bogus lodges are African American, unfortunately. They are men of color.
Sad but true.
The majority. Not saying that it's all. Because trust me, there are those the white ones as well. But that's not what we're talking about. There is these southern states that this needs to overcome. And the best way to do it is one step at a time. And this is why we do it. So when they sit there and they say it's all or nothing, you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, it's deeper than just just paperwork being signed and hands being shaked. Like it's especially in the South, particularly in the South, the North Carolina, the Carolinas, the Kentuckys, the Tennessees, the Alabamas, the Georgia. I mean, it's like it's serious shit. Like you said, his grandfather killed my grandfather, or he chased my grandfather down, or hung him, or any of these heinous crimes like this. It's not just about putting on aprons and gloves and shaking hands and taking pictures and kissing babies. People feel some type of way about this kind of stuff.
They can never fathom applying for recognition with the state Grand Lodge, because the state Grand Lodge will laugh at them.
Oh, the way I just did.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. This is and some of them will try to play it off. We don't need that recognition, right? We don't need that recognition. I don't need that. No, it's not that you don't need that. It's that you won't dare apply for it because you know you're going to get rejected. Plain and simple. And then they try to sit there and say, well, you know, England doesn't govern all of Freemasonry. England doesn't govern all of Freemasonry.
They don't. No, they don't.
They don't. But here's the best part about that. Because they don't do that means that we are all sovereign. And
Correct.
now I'm going to segue into sovereignty. Sovereignty. What is sovereignty?
Ooh. So sovereignty in a nutshell, right? You take the word sovereign. It literally means self-governing. I want to say it's a Latin-based word, like not that I'm getting into linguistics, but I mean, literally it means self-governing in a nutshell. So when you talk about Grand Lodges having sovereignty, it means that they decide how they're going to conduct themselves, how they're going to meet, conduct business, fellowship with others. They control all of it.
For their jurisdiction.
For their jurisdiction alone. Hence, right. When you look at the names of all of these jurisdictions, it's always, on the tail end, and it's jurisdiction incorporated. Most Ritual Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the most ancient and honorable fraternity of free and accepted Masons.
I like how you sat there and said ancient. I was like, hey, I see what you did there.
State of New York and its jurisdictions.
Right.
Incorporated, which not to cut you off, which I think is important because, to your point, New York has charters that are not geographically located in New York.
Right.
Which is why the jurisdiction part is important in the name.
Right. So when they sit there and they say Prince Hall is not sovereign because they need permission from the state to be recognized by UGLE, the United Grand Lodge of England, what does that have to do with us? Did we create that rule?
Nah, I wasn't around for it. That's for sure.
Did the state create that rule?
No.
That's UGLE. That's the United Grand Lodge of England creating that rule for the United Grand Lodge of England. Got that? Now, let me make something very clear. I don't agree with that. I don't think it should happen that way because we are sovereign. And at the end of the day, we should be recognized independently because we are a sovereign jurisdiction. Understand it completely. Right? But that does not mean that we're not sovereign. They created that rule for themselves. I cannot sit here, or my jurisdiction, any jurisdiction cannot sit here and tell the United Grand Lodge of England they can't do that.
Correct. You can't. That'd be counterintuitive.
That's because it's on them.
That's their rule, exactly.
But let me also make something very clear. That's not the same rule for Scotland. For the Grand Lodge of Scotland. You know why? And this is where people start talking and they don't realize what they're saying. Currently, the Grand Lodge of Scotland does not recognize the Grand Lodge of New York. But guess what?
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. But guess what?
They recognize us.
They recognize us.
Well, it's funny you say that because I don't know if this is the case now. So brothers out there, forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but at least 5 years ago, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia wasn't recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England. But
and they're still not.
It's still not? Okay.
Yeah, and they're still not.
But of course, all Prince Hall Grand Lodges, barring rather recent circumstances, recognize each other.
No, but I'm going to put you on right now. I'm going to put you on right now. Check this out.
Tried to dodge it.
Speaking of Georgia, right? They're very quick to sit there and say, well, the Grand Lodge of Georgia considers the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia clandestine. They don't realize that the Grand Lodge of New Mexico currently recognizes the Grand Lodge of Georgia, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. A state Grand Lodge.
Correct.
Recognizes the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia.
That you won't.
You know what I'm saying? So you sit there and say, like, you're talking about them as if they're not recognized anywhere. But guess what? They are recognized foreignly by other Grand Lodges.
Yeah, several. Not even Prince Hall Grand Lodges, several Grand Lodges in general.
So understand that you don't, when we talk about recognition, when we talk about sovereignty, please know what you're talking about before you start talking about it. And this is why I say, if you don't know what you're saying, don't say it. Because you're very quick to sit there and run your mouth and spread all this blah. But you don't know what you're talking about. Let me make something very clear also. When we going back to legitimacy. Because it just clicked on me also.
Nah, go for it.
Just because you're going to sit there and say, or some of them are going to sit there and say, well, I walk the walk, I talk the talk. I was initiated, passed, and raised. I am a Mason.
Blah, blah, blah. You read it on Google.
You follow a philosophy. Just because you follow a philosophy does not make you a Mason. Let me make something very clear. Check this out. Marcus Aurelius, The Meditations, a philosophy book, does not make me a Stoic. Okay? Confucius, The Analytics, does not make me a Confucianist. Okay?
No, not particularly.
Sun Tzu's Art of War.
Art of War
Does not mean that I follow everything to the T. Okay? I take what I need to make myself a better person. That's it. Just because you follow a philosophy does not make you a Mason.
Mm.
What makes you a Mason is that legitimacy, that longevity, the lineage. Okay? Because you have to be tied to operative Freemasonry. Back to that. So I'm hoping that I got my point across. I'm hoping that, at the end of the day, we need to stop spreading false information, because every time it's done, this is what I'm going to start doing going forward. I'm going to correct it. And what I'm going to do is correct it and not even mention your name, because I'm not giving you that burn.
See, Josh is a better man than me. I'd put your ass on blast, but hey, what can I say? And in all seriousness, I find this one of those things where it's like, part of me finds it comical, absolutely comical, right? Like, you guys are like the backyardigans of Freemasonry, right? You go on McCall, you're spending all this money, and you're taking pictures, and it's getting you nowhere, right? But on the flip side of that same coin, I feel bad, because all of these things can be avoided, corrected, and rectified. We have several brothers in our Grand Lodge, Josh included, that have, found their way to regularity and recognition. So it's not like you don't have options. It's not like there aren't resources and people you can talk to. The same people that you're bashing are the same people, unbeknownst to you, that would sign off on you coming over.
And here's a
don't
thing
bite the hand that could feed you.
Here's the thing that I want to also bring up. This is not a bashing fest. I don't want anybody to misinterpret this podcast or this episode as a bashing fest.
Correct.
There was false information being presented, and the individual decided to sit there and call me out and be disrespectful by trying to literally mess up my last name. Feliz Navidad. Come on, dude. And at the end of the day, I didn't take that personal, don't even care. But what I didn't like is the misinformation. Okay. This episode is to correct that misinformation, because the more misinformation we have being circulated all around amongst these organizations, the more people we're going to have in the dark. And understand that there are some very, very good men that are part of these organizations. I will never take that away. I was a part of a clandestine organization, of a bogus organization. But the men in that organization were amazing. They taught me literally a lot. And I can never take that away from them. But at the end of the day, what made them bogus was that lineage that they didn't have. And that's what it falls down to. Just because you walk the walk and talk the talk and you were initiated, passed, and raised, none of that matters if you're part of a bogus organization. And I'm trying to get that across to people to understand. You have the power to do what you need to do to become regular if you wanted to. And understand, this isn't about, I understand if you have invested time, money, titles, degrees, I get it. I understand. But guess what? I got my 3rd degree back as soon as I came in. I got my 32nd. I'm in the Holy Royal Ark. I'm about to go back into the I'm about to go into the purple and the black. Which I don't know if you heard about that, but we'll talk about that off screen. About to get into the purple and the black. I was my Grand Lodge. And this is a big thing for me because I came from a very small jurisdiction. I'm talking about maybe 30, 20 members, right? They made me a worthy brother. That's a big thing for me because they didn't have to. They could have sat there and said, no, you need to get your past masters to become a Grand Lodge officer. You get what I'm saying? And they recognized me for my work. They've recognized me for my talents. And they've recognized me for busting my ass. Okay? But understand that I did it legitimately. At the end of the day, I would do it all over again. If I knew that the Margon organization wasn't legitimate, I can't live with that. How do I tell my kids? Like, seriously, they go out and they find out that I'm not a legitimate Mason. How do I look at them knowing that? Like, I know within myself, I couldn't do it. So this is not a bash fest. This is addressing what needed to be addressed. Brandon, you got any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, right? It's like, I mean, I could spend 3 years in the library, read all the books, know everything about everything, right? But if I don't have a diploma from a university, an institution of learning, there's nothing to solidify or validate that, right? It's the same for masonry, right? Like you could be the grandmaster on high of all things. You could be the great I am, but it doesn't mean anything if no one acknowledges that.
Well, it's acknowledged within their circle.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course, but you know, in the totality of things, right? Like if you got
in the bigger world of things,
in the real world, where we all, you know, work and play, who cares?
Right.
Like as far as I'm concerned, is what 59 grandmasters, grandmasters.
As far as I'm concerned, it's crazy because, bro. Well, we know it's a lot more than that. With you, if we're talking overseas as well. But
of course, but
bro, my biggest thing is this: I've had conversations with grandmasters, quote unquote, online, and they are floored, and I mean floored, when I don't give them that respect, and they don't understand why.
I don't know you to be such. It's as simple as that for me.
I mean, seriously. And then you get some of these clandestine Masons like, yo, how can you talk to him like that? He ain't a brother.
Correct.
He ain't a brother. Like, I'm sorry. I've had conversations with brothers where I've had to literally, I've gone, and let me make something clear. I've gone back and forth correcting Prince Hall Masons and regular Masons, and I've done that also. Don't ever think that I don't sit here and this is just a straight thing. You know, if I know that it's not to be true, I correct it. You understand? And they may not like it, but from the strength of brotherly love, I can't let you believe something that's not true.
Say it one more time. Say it one more time, please.
On the strength of brotherly love, I cannot let you think something that is true that it's not true. I can't. Because then I'm not looking out for my brother.
Correct.
So, on that note, thank you everybody for coming on. Brandon, you were great.
Thank you for having me, of course.
Bro, you here. You co-host. Nobody said anything bad about you in the last episode. You good.
Well, you know. I'm not
Which, by the way,
most of the time.
Guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You know what I'm saying? Helps the channel. Anyways, I'm out, y'all. Until the next episode. Peace.